October 3, 1943, 30,000 feet above the North Sea. The freezing metal of a .50 caliber Browning machine gun pressed against a waist gunner's cheek as he watched a Messerschmitt 109 cut through the formation 200 yards away. His fingers shook on the trigger, not because he was scared, but because of what he was about to do. Everything his instincts told him was wrong. The German fighter was coming fast from the side, a perfect 90-degree deflection shot. He could see the black crosses on the wings, the shiny cockpit canopy, and the flashes of the guns as the 109 fired. Every part of him wanted to aim straight at the fighter, put his gun sight right on the enemy's nose, and pull the trigger. Instead, he aimed 6 aircraft lengths behind it. Between the fighter and his own bomber's tail, the .50 caliber Browning roared. 2 seconds later, the Messerschmitt exploded in a ball of orange fire. This gunner had just shown a truth that went against all common sense. When shooting from a moving bomber at a fighter, aiming directly at the target always made you miss. The secret to surviving was aiming where the target had already been. This strange method, called position firing, would turn American aerial gunners from scared men spraying bullets into the sky into skilled shooters who could destroy enemy planes with shocking accuracy. But the road to this discovery started 3 years earlier in a dusty Nevada desert, with men who had no idea they were about to change the rules of air combat. January 25, 1941, Las Vegas, Nevada. The cold was near freezing as Colonel Martinez Steneth got out of his car and looked over 60 square miles of nothing at all. Creosote bushes, jackrabbits, and endless sand stretched in every direction under a pale winter sky. This empty land, he had been told, would become the most important gunnery school in U.S. military history. The problem was simple, but terrifying. The United States Army Air Force had exactly 0 special places for training aerial gunners. Not one school to teach men how to shoot from moving planes at moving targets. Not one standard program. Not one proven way to turn farm boys and factory workers into men who could protect billion-dollar bombers and their crews from fighters flying 300 Mp. The stakes were just as simple. Without trained gunners, the whole American bombing campaign would fail before it started. Big bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, carried up to 13 .50 caliber machine guns for defense. But those guns were useless if the men behind them did not know how to use them. And in January 1941, they did not. The British had learned this the hard way. Royal Air Force bomber crews flying night missions over Germany were being killed by Luftwaffe fighters. British gunners, trained mostly on ground targets and simple exercises, British gunners were completely unprepared for real 3-dimensional aerial combat. They aimed straight at attacking fighters, just like their instincts told them to. They missed and they died. The United States military was determined not to make the same mistake. On January 25, 1941, the Army Air Force leased 60,000 acres of Nevada desert from the city of Las Vegas for $1 a year. Construction crews arrived in March. Barracks, classrooms, hangars, and firing ranges sprang up where nothing had been before. By June 17th, 103 instructors had arrived for duty. These men had to figure out how to teach a skill that nobody in America really understood. The official order came fast. On December 9, 1941, 2 days after Pearl Harbor, the Chief of the Air Force ordered immediate aerial training for gunners. The base officially opened on December 20th. Within weeks, the first students started arriving at Las Vegas Army Airfield. The war had started, and America desperately needed trained aerial gunners. Training began on solid ground. Instructors mounted shotguns on fixed platforms with limited angles of fire, and students shot at clay pigeons thrown into the air at different angles. The idea made sense. Clay shooting taught the basics of leading a moving target, aiming ahead to meet something moving across your line of sight. Most students hit their targets. They were learning deflection shooting, an old method hunters had used for centuries. If a duck flies left to right, you aim ahead. Your pellets and the duck reach the same spot at the same time. Simple physics, easy to understand and natural. Then instructors put the shotguns on the backs of moving trucks. Suddenly, everything changed. As the trucks drove through the desert, the students found their targets impossible to hit. Clay pigeons that should have been easy shots flew past untouched. Confusion spread through the group. These men were shooting exactly as they had been taught, leading their targets, aiming ahead. So why were they missing? The answer was a principle so strange that even experienced instructors had trouble explaining it. When you are standing still and shooting at a moving target, you aim ahead. But when you are moving and shooting at a moving target, the rules are reversed. Sergeant Robert Hayes, an instructor from Texas with a physics background, stood in front of his first class of confused students and drew a simple diagram on the blackboard. A bomber moving at 300 mph, a fighter attacking from the side at the same speed. A bullet fired from a gun on that bomber. The students thought the bullet went straight to wherever they aimed. They were wrong. The bullet already had the bomber's forward speed the moment it left the gun. Every bullet fired from a bomber was already moving 300 mph forward, in addition to the gun's own speed. This meant a bullet fired sideways did not actually travel straight to the side. It moved diagonally, pushed forward by the bomber's motion even as it went away from the gun. The faster the bomber flew, the stronger this effect became. At 300 mph, a bullet fired 90 degrees to the side would curve forward a lot, like a baseball curveball, but much stronger. Hayes pulled out a piece of string and a weight to make a simple pendulum. He walked forward while letting the weight swing. The students saw the weight did not hang straight down. It tilted backward, pulled by the forward motion. "Release that weight," Hayes said, "and it does not drop straight down. It carries forward with you. Your bullets act the same way." The results were shocking. If a German fighter attacked from exactly the beam, 90 degrees to the bomber's side, and a gunner aimed straight at that fighter, the bullet would curve forward and go harmlessly ahead of the plane. The bomber's speed guaranteed a miss. To hit a target directly to the side, you had to aim behind it, sometimes very far behind it. The exact amount depended on the attack angle, the speeds of both aircraft, and the distance to the target. But the rule stayed the same, and it went against human instinct. The British had found this rule by brutal trial and error over Europe. They called it the zone system, dividing the space around a bomber into zones, each needing different aiming methods. The Americans took this idea and made it better, finally creating what they called position firing. Position firing relied on a key observation about how fighters attacked bombers. To bring their fixed forward guns to bear, fighters had to fly pursuit curves, smooth, arcing paths that kept their guns pointed at the bomber. From the gunner's view, an attacking fighter seemed to slide sideways toward the bomber's tail while getting bigger as it closed the distance. This made a geometric relationship that could be worked out. The fighter's angle to the bomber's fore and aft axis, combined with the bomber's speed and the bullet's speed, decided exactly where the gunner had to aim. The Army Air Forces made tables, charts, and finally a simple rule set based on radians of deflection. A radian here was an angular measure that told gunners how far behind the attacking fighter to aim. At a 90-degree attack angle with normal speeds, a gunner might need to aim 8 to 12 radians behind the fighter. Each radian was a set angular distance, roughly 1 aircraft length at combat range. That meant aiming 8 to 12 aircraft lengths behind the attacker to hit it. Everything in a gunner's training and every hunting instinct said this was crazy. But math and physics did not care about instincts. By summer 1942, Las Vegas Army Airfield was graduating 600 gunners every 5 weeks. Training had grown into a full 6-week program that carefully broke down students' natural shooting habits and rebuilt them with position firing methods. Week 1 covered ground school, ballistics, aircraft recognition, and basic mechanical knowledge of the .50 caliber Browning machine gun were taught. Students learned to field strip and reassemble their weapons blindfolded, so they would be ready to work in cramped, freezing, vibrating gun positions. Week 2 moved to the shotgun trucks. Students spent hours shooting clay pigeons from moving platforms to learn the feel of firing while in motion. Instructors slowly increased truck speed, forcing students to adjust their aim points further and further behind the targets. Week 3 introduced the manipulation trainers. These were towers 10 to 40 feet tall, set up like a bomber formation. Students sat in mock turrets and tracked dummy fighters pulled on wires across the sky. No live ammunition was used, only constant practice of keeping a gun sight on a moving target while compensating for the bomber's motion. Week 4 brought the Waller gunnery trainer. Students sat in darkness and fired at fighter images shown on a large curved screen. As the images dove and weaved, students tracked and fired, while the trainer recorded every trigger pull and every hit and miss. The trainer could copy any attack angle, any speed, any situation. Students saw their mistakes right away, learned from them, and tried again. Week 5 was air-to-air firing. Students climbed into real B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, took positions at waist guns and turrets, and fired at fabric sleeves towed behind other aircraft. Each student's ammunition was color-coded. After each mission, instructors counted the holes, tallied the hits, and gave immediate feedback. Week 6 was advanced aerial firing and final exams. Students faced mock attacks from many angles, practiced emergency procedures, and proved they could work every defensive position. The washout rate was about 20%. Those who graduated got their silver gunner wings and were assigned to bomber crews. By July 7, 1943, the 7 gunnery schools across the United States had graduated 19,189 gunners. By the end of the year, that number reached 5,776. Las Vegas alone was producing 600 graduates every 5 weeks at peak capacity. The production machine ran at full speed, but production was not the same as effectiveness. The real test came over Europe. August 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above Germany. 376 B-17 bombers of the United States 8th Air Force droned toward Schweinfurt and Regensburg deep inside the Third Reich. The mission was bold. Destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt assembly plants at Regensburg to hurt Germany's ability to build fighters and keep existing ones flying. The Luftwaffe had other plans. Over 400 German fighters rose to meet the American formation. Messerschmitt Bf-109S, Focke-Wulf 190s, and Messerschmitt Bf-110 twin-engine fighters equipped with rockets attacked. The air war was about to become a slaughter. The German fighters used new tactics designed to overwhelm bomber defensive fire. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high hit where the B-17 had minimal defenses. Attacks from 6 o'clock low exploited the bombers' weak lower defenses. Turrets had limited firing angles, and deadly rocket attacks came from beyond machine gun range. What happened next shocked both sides. The American bombers lost 60 aircraft, 20% of the attacking force. These were catastrophic losses that made many believe daylight strategic bombing without fighter escort was impossible. But the Germans also lost planes, not just a few, not 10 or 20. The American gunners, using position firing taught at Las Vegas and the other schools, shot down about 27 German fighters. That number was much lower than some early claims of over 200 kills. Those big claims came from the fog and chaos of battle, when many gunners fired at the same plane. Even the confirmed kills showed something new. American bomber gunners, if trained right, could hit and destroy attacking fighters. Waist gunners across the formation used the Nevada techniques. Fighter attacking from 3 o'clock level, range about 300 yards, applied 12 radians deflection. Aim between the fighter and the bomber's tail. Fire in 3-round bursts. Watch for hits on the fighter's wing root and engine. Fighter breaks off, smoking, and disappears in a vertical dive. The method worked just as the math predicted. But gunners also learned something very important. Their first instinct was always to aim straight at the target. They had to force themselves to use the correct deflection. Training beat instinct. Without the systematic teaching at gunnery schools, they would have missed. This was the key insight. Position firing was not natural. It went against every hunting instinct and every basic shooting habit students brought with them. Only hard, repeated training could override those instincts in the stress of combat. Men who had spent 6 weeks shooting from moving platforms, tracking fighters on simulators, and firing at towed targets could force themselves to aim behind, while every nerve told them to aim ahead. The Schweinfurt raid taught both sides important lessons. The Germans learned that well-trained bomber formations were far more dangerous than they had thought. Single-fighter attacks, even from good angles, carried big risk. The Americans learned that daylight bombing without fighter escort was not sustainable even with good gunnery training. But the raid also proved the training program worked. Position firing worked. Gunners who used proper deflection could hit fast fighters in three-dimensional combat. The next question was how to make them even better. The answer came from an unexpected place: Britain. In late 1943, Royal Air Force night fighters began using a new device called the Mk2 gyro gun sight. This clever tool used a spinning gyroscope, mirrors, and complex calculations to automatically work out the right deflection for any attack angle. The pilot only had to put a moving reticle on the target, and the sight did the math. The United States Army Air Forces saw the potential right away. If a gyro gun sight could calculate deflection for fighter pilots, could a similar system help bomber gunners? In November 1943, American engineers began copying British gyro sight technology for bomber turrets. The result was the K-14 gun sight for fighters and adapted versions for bomber turrets. These sights had a new dual reticle system. One reticle stayed fixed and showed where the guns actually pointed. A second reticle, driven by a gyroscope, showed where the bullets would really go, taking into account the aircraft's motion, the angle of fire, and basic ballistics. In level flight with no deflection needed, the two reticles matched. But as soon as a gunner swung his turret to track a target, the gyro reticle moved and showed exactly where to aim. The gunner only had to keep the moving reticle on the target. The sight did the lead calculation automatically. Putting gyro sights in bomber turrets caused big problems. The sights were large and complex, and required the gunner to set the target's wingspan to estimate range. In combat, with fighters attacking from many angles at once, setting wingspan dials and adjusting controls was often impossible. Still, the gyro sights were a huge improvement. Tests in early 1944 showed gunners using gyro sights got about twice the hit rate of crews using standard ring and bead sights, even when both knew position firing. The automatic deflection calculation removed the mental load of memorizing radian charts and angle tables. By summer 1944, many American bombers had compensating sights. These were automated systems that calculated deflection from the turret's position and the bomber's airspeed and altitude. They were not as advanced as full gyro sights, but were easier to use under combat stress. Gunners set airspeed and altitude once, then simply tracked the target, and the sight adjusted the aiming point automatically. The difference in effectiveness was striking. Bombers with advanced sighting systems and gunners trained in position firing could shoot down attacking fighters at ranges and angles that had seemed impossible. Combat reports showed clear improvements. Gunners who had trouble scoring hits with standard sights began downing enemy aircraft within weeks of getting compensating sights. By late 1944, the Army Air Forces had refined the gunnery training program using 2 years of combat experience. The 6-week course grew to include more advanced topics, gunnery control and discipline, and rules to ensure gunners did not fire at friendly fighters. Combat tactics, learning German fighter attack patterns, and emergency steps for jammed guns, broken turrets, and wounded crew were taught. One idea caught instructors' and students' attention. It was Operation Pinball. Las Vegas Army Airfield got 7 special Bell P-63 King Cobra fighters called pinballs. These planes wore thick duraluminum armor over their whole bodies. Students fired special frangible bullets made from compressed lead powder and plastic that broke into dust on any hard hit. The pinball planes had electronic sensors and a big red light in the propeller spinner. When a frangible bullet hit the plane, the pinball light flashed. Students could see their hits right away. More important, the pinball pilots flew real attack patterns, diving and weaving just like German and Japanese fighters. Students learned to track real planes doing real moves, not just fabric sleeves on fixed paths. The pinball program made gunnery scores much better. Students who trained against pinballs had 30 to 40% better hit rates in combat than students who only trained on towed targets. The program spread to all 7 Army Air Force's gunnery schools by early 1945. The most telling facts came from studying combat results. As more bombers got better sights and more gunners finished improved training, the power of defensive fire rose clearly. Intelligence officers tracking German fighter losses from bomber gunners showed a steady rise from mid-1943 through the war's end. The stats became more complex after long-range fighter escorts arrived, which cut bomber losses a lot and changed air combat over Europe. By early 1944, American P-51 Mustangs could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. German fighters that once attacked bomber groups at will now faced angry American and British fighters hunting them over their own ground. Still, the data was clear. Bombers with trained gunners and good sighting gear shot down about twice as many attacking fighters as bombers with untrained crews and basic sights. This 2 times improvement came from many things: better training, in-position firing, smarter sight gear, improved tactics, and fire discipline. But the heart of it was the odd truth learned in the Nevada desert. The Pacific Theater gave another test for American gunnery methods. Japanese fighter tactics were very different from German ones. Zeros and Oscars used great maneuverability, not armor and heavy guns. They attacked from steeper angles, made tighter turns, and often closed to point-blank range, relying on agility to dodge defensive fire. American gunners changed position firing ideas to meet these new problems and adapted them to these fast-turning tactics. The B-29 Superfortress, used in the Pacific from late 1944, had a revolutionary remote control gun system. Gunners sat in pressurized compartments and controlled turrets using periscope sights and electronic fire control systems. The system automatically calculated deflection based on the target's range, angle, and aircraft speeds. Central fire control gunners on B-29s later described the system's effectiveness in post-war interviews. Japanese fighters came in fast, usually from below, trying to get under the formation. Gunners would get the target in their sights. The computer would calculate range and deflection, and they would fire. The turrets moved automatically. Barrels would rise or lower. All the gunner had to do was keep the sight on the target and pull the trigger. Speeds were too high and angles too tricky for manual calculations. The automated system made defensive gunnery possible against Japan's fastest fighters. The B-29's central fire control system was the peak of position firing technology. Human gunners acquired and tracked targets, while computers did all the math, including deflection, bullet drop, and even wind drift. The combination was deadly. By the end of the war in August 1945, the Army Air Forces had graduated over 214,000 aerial gunners from 7 special gunnery schools. Las Vegas alone trained over 44,000 gunners by August 1944. These men learned to override instincts, trust math and physics over common sense, and let their bombers' speed carry bullets into enemy planes. Measuring the exact impact was hard. Combat claims were often exaggerated. Many gunners fired at the same fighter, each claiming the kill. Gun camera footage was limited, especially in bombers where cameras couldn't cover all positions. German and Japanese loss records were incomplete, destroyed in bombings or lost in the chaos of surrender. But available data suggested that well-trained American gunners got roughly double the kills of untrained gunners using the same guns. This boost came almost entirely from learning and using position firing principles. The technique didn't make gunners superhuman, but it made them capable. In aerial combat, being capable meant survival. Lessons from World War II. Gunnery schools shaped military aviation for decades afterward. Korean War B-29 gunners used improved versions of the same position firing techniques were later used in aerial combat against advanced Soviet MiG-15 fighters. The principles still worked even against jet aircraft that were much faster and more powerful than propeller-driven bombers. Modern fighter aircraft still use the same basic idea. Advanced computing gun sights calculate deflection automatically, but the underlying physics is the same. A projectile fired from a moving aircraft carries that aircraft's speed. To hit a target, you have to account for your own motion, not just the target's motion. The Nevada desert that once held Las Vegas Army Airfield is now Nellis Air Force Base, home of the Air Force Fighter Weapons School and the Thunderbirds demonstration team. The old gunnery ranges are gone, replaced by modern training facilities. But the basic truth discovered there on January 25, 1941, is still part of American military doctrine. When you are standing still, aim ahead of a moving target. When you are moving, aim behind. Physics does not care what feels natural. It only cares what works. The German Luftwaffe never fully used position firing principles for their bomber gunners. German training focused on individual marksmanship and relied a lot on experience. New gunners learned from veterans, picking up techniques through informal mentorship instead of systematic teaching. This worked okay when the Luftwaffe flew mostly over friendly territory with experienced crews. But as losses grew and veteran gunners died, German bomber defensive effectiveness dropped sharply. The Japanese military faced similar problems. Training for aerial gunners was limited and informal. Some individuals understood position firing ideas, but it was never made part of standard doctrine. Japanese bombers suffered, with defensive gunnery far below American levels. The British first developed many concepts that became American position firing doctrine. But British bomber tactics evolved differently. Royal Air Force Bomber Command switched to night operations, where visual gunnery mattered less, and electronic countermeasures and fighter escorts mattered more. The RAF did put gyro gun sights on some planes, including an experimental radar-aided tail turret on Lancaster bombers, but they never set up the full training programs that American gunnery schools used. Only the United States combined systematic position firing training with advanced sights and industrial-scale production of trained gunners. This created bomber crews that could defend themselves well, even without fighter escort, though escorts were still much better. Moving from instinctive aiming to calculated position firing was a huge shift in human skill. For thousands of years, hunters and soldiers learned to aim directly at targets or slightly ahead for moving targets. These methods were intuitive, easy to teach, and worked in most situations. Aerial combat and fast-moving bombers broke all those old rules. Speeds were too high, angles too complex, and the physics completely counterintuitive. Success meant letting go of instinct and trusting abstract mathematics. Trainees had to believe that aiming 12 aircraft lengths behind an attacking fighter would hit, even when everything they had ever known about shooting said otherwise. This mental change was perhaps the greatest achievement of the Army Air Force's gunnery schools. Not the buildings in the Nevada desert, not the advanced training equipment, but the ability to rewire human instincts, overriding millions of years of hunter-gatherer programming with calculated precision. The legacy of World War II aerial gunnery training goes far beyond the war. The systematic way of breaking down complex skills, the focus on repetitive training to overcome instinct, and the mix of technology and human performance became models for military training worldwide. Modern fighter pilots learn position firing in their first weeks of training. The words and equipment are different now, far more advanced, but the principle is the same. A projectile fired from a moving platform carries that platform's speed. To hit a target, you must account for your own motion, not just the target's motion. By 1945, the United States had created the most effective aerial gunnery training program in history. The combination of systematic position firing instruction, advanced sights, and intense hands-on practice produced gunners who could defend bombers against determined fighter attacks. The improvement came from one counterintuitive truth. When attacking fighters appear at 3 o'clock, screaming in at 300 miles per hour, trained gunners don't aim where the fighters are. They don't aim where the fighters are going. They aim where the fighters have been. They aim behind, trusting that their bomber's speed will carry bullets into the fighter's path. They override every instinct, every natural reaction, and do what mathematics demands. The gunnery schools closed in September 1945. As the war ended and demobilization began, the Las Vegas facilities were converted to other uses, eventually becoming Nellis Air Force Base. The instructors returned to civilian life, carrying with them the knowledge of how to teach an almost impossible skill. Students dispersed across America, forever changed by the experience. But the lesson remained, etched into military doctrine and training manuals for generations. Sometimes survival means doing what feels completely wrong. That mathematical precision can beat natural instinct, and that proper training can rewire the human brain to perform calculations faster than conscious thought. American bomber gunners learned to account for their motion, trust the math, and fire with perfect timing. They learned to aim behind. By learning that one counterintuitive rule, they helped win the most destructive war in human history. The story of position firing is really a story about human adaptability, about the ability to learn skills that go against instinct, and about how systematic training can turn ordinary people into specialists capable of amazing performance under impossible conditions. It's a story about physics and math, but it's also a story about trust. Trust in instructors who taught techniques that felt wrong. Trust in equipment that could calculate things the human brain struggled to figure out. Trust in training that could override millions of years of evolution. That trust was proven in the skies over Europe and the Pacific, where properly trained gunners shot down enemy fighters that could have killed their crews, where understanding deflection meant survival. The Nevada desert that started this transformation is now home to the most advanced combat aviation training in the world. The Thunderbirds perform aerial demonstrations that would have seemed impossible to the men who trained there in 1942. The Bow Fighter Weapons School teaches tactics and techniques that would have been science fiction in World War II, but the basic principle is the same. Motion affects trajectory. Speed changes everything. Sometimes hitting a target means aiming where it isn't, trusting math to bring bullet and target together in the future. American aerial gunners learned that lesson the hard way, through intensive training in the Nevada desert and brutal testing over the skies of Europe and the Pacific. They learned to override instinct and trust their training. By learning that one counterintuitive truth, they became the most effective bomber defensive gunners of World War II. Not because of better weapons, not because of better planes, but because they understood physics and had the discipline to apply it even when instinct screamed otherwise. Physics does not care what feels natural. It only cares what works. And in the skies above World War II, battlefields, what worked was position firing, a counterintuitive truth that saved thousands of lives and helped win a